Welcome. We are so glad that you could join us today. I am Jennifer McDonald, the Training and Implementation Manager for GrapeSEED, and we are excited to present Jody Shell today. She is here to share an understanding of what poverty looks like in the United States, how poverty affects our youngest students, and how we can begin to meet these children's needs through best practices. Jody has over 20 years of education experience. She has taught kindergarten and was honored with the title of Macomb County Elementary Teacher of the Year in 2010. Jody has a ZA endorsement, a master's degree in language and literacy in early childhood, and has earned the TESOL Foundation Course Certificate. Before joining the GrapeSEED team, Jody used GrapeSEED in her own classroom. She is currently a professional learning specialist who trains, coaches, and supports GrapeSEED teachers in the United States. During the webinar today, if you have any questions, please feel free to type them in the question bar. We did set aside some time at the end to answer those questions. With that being said, I would like to introduce you to Jody Shell.
Thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today to learn more about the topic of children and poverty. I think it's safe to say that as educators, we care deeply on multiple levels for the well-being of our students. So this topic is very fragile and very meaningful to us. Now, I once heard the comment that if you don't tell children they're poor, they won't know that they are. And, well, that may be true in some circumstances, but whether or not children know that they're living in poverty is irrelevant. It's the way that poverty might affect them that's really critical for us to be aware of, as painful and as sensitive as it can be. Now, according to the 2017 statement from the National Center for Children in Poverty, about 15 million children in the United States, so about 21% of our kids, live in families with incomes below the federal poverty level. We know that percentage is extremely high. In our hearts, we know that this must be having an effect on our students who fall into this category. So today, we're going to take a deeper dive into the multiple ways that poverty shows itself in our country, its potentially life-changing effect on our boys and girls, and how we can be agents of change for our children by thoughtfully planning and incorporating some powerful best practices into our school day. I'd like to note before we go on that the information discussed throughout this presentation today mostly comes from Eric Jensen's Teaching with Poverty in Mind, What Being Poor Does to Kids' Brains, and What Schools Can Do About It. So if you were asked to give your own definition of the word poverty, it would likely be shaped by some stereotypes or some facts that you've read or heard about over the years, and maybe even some personal life experiences. But the definition of poverty is as follows. Poverty is a chronic and debilitating condition that results from multiple adverse synergistic risk factors and affects the mind, body, and soul. Wow, affects the mind, body, and soul. That's not easy for us to wrap our minds around, is it? That little children in our own schools and classrooms could be experiencing something so powerful that it could adversely affect their souls certainly wakes us up and calls us to action. So now we're going to explore a little bit of what this looks like here in the United States. Living in poverty in the U.S. might mean some of the following things: long-term unemployment, low-wage jobs, limited job skills, homelessness, cramped housing, more than one family to a home, that could mean non-energy efficient housing, housing in need of repair, unreliable transportation, very limited or no assets. Sometimes it looks like lack of quality child care, and even incarcerated family members that could include children and parents, just to name a few of the more common characteristics that are sometimes overlooked by the most casual observers. And the reason that some of these points can sometimes be overlooked is because poverty comes in so many forms, and it certainly isn't the same for everybody. It's important that we're aware of the different types of poverty, that the staff in our schools has an understanding and empathy is built. And as we explore some of the different types of poverty, you may find that you have students in your own school or classroom who are going to come to mind. So let's dive in and look at some of the different types of poverty. First, we have the idea of situational poverty. Situational poverty is usually caused by a sudden crisis or loss and is usually temporary. So some events causing situational poverty include things ranging from environmental disasters to divorce to severe health problems and even a death in the family. Another type of poverty is generational poverty. And generational poverty occurs in families where at least 2 generations in a row of a family have been born into poverty. And families living in this type of poverty aren't quite yet equipped with the tools to move out of their situation. Another type of poverty for us to be aware of is the idea of relative poverty. Relative poverty refers to the economic status of a family whose income is insufficient to meet its own society's average standard of living. So that's relative poverty. We also have urban poverty. Urban poverty occurs in big cities and metropolitan areas of at least 50,000 people. And the urban poor deal with something that's unique, and it's called complex aggregate stressors. And in layman's terms, that means things like crime, crowding, violence, and noise that can come from city life. So things like traffic and sirens and maybe even blaring music and television sets, maybe yelling, maybe even gunshots and so forth. So those living in urban poverty, another unique quality is that they're often dependent on inadequate large city services. The next and final type of poverty that we're going to touch on right now is the idea of rural poverty. And this type of poverty occurs in non-metropolitan areas with a population below 50,000. So there are more single guardian households, less access to services, less support programs for disabilities, and even sometimes less quality education opportunities in these rural poverty situations. Programs encouraging transition from welfare to work can be problematic in these remote rural areas too, where job opportunities are fewer. And the rural poverty rate has exceeded the urban rate every single year since data collection began back in the 1960s. So that's another fact that sometimes we're unaware of. All right, so you might be considering the possibility or questioning the possibility of an overlap here, and that's something for us to consider. Families could possibly be experiencing a combination of situations, meaning that they could be living in an urban environment with those complex aggregate stressors that I mentioned a moment ago, and they could be experiencing situational poverty at the same time, making the challenge of moving out of poverty seem even more daunting for them. Right now, you might be thinking about how these different types of poverty have shown up in your own community, your own district, or even in your own classroom. And it can feel really enlightening and interesting for us to learn about the different types of poverty and to possibly make some personal and professional connections to this fragile topic. But now that we have a little bit more insight into the different types of poverty, let's move on to the more critical task of understanding what this means for our kids. So what are some of the consequences of living in poverty for some of our boys and girls? First, as I've alluded to, one characteristic is that children living in poverty are exposed to more stress, more intense stress, and longer-lasting stress than children not living in those types of situations. And we know that this chronic stress negatively affects students' attention, sometimes their focus, their cognition, and even sometimes their IQ. Another characteristic can be that when it comes to interacting socially with peers and teachers, children living in poverty can suffer in that area as well. Multiple research studies have observed that children living in poverty tend to hear less reciprocal conversations among other people in their home, and parents raising their families in impoverished situations are less likely to initiate conversation with their children for the purpose of social connection. Low socioeconomic status kids are 50% less likely to be read aloud to by a parent compared to higher income children, and parents in lower socioeconomic status situations tend to use less complex vocabulary and sentence structure when they're talking to their sons and daughters than parents in higher income situations do as well. And finally, by age 3, another characteristic is that there is a 30 million word gap between children supported by welfare and children living above poverty. Second grade vocabulary and oral language skills are often a predictor of 11th grade academic performance for at-risk students. And even more alarming, third grade vocabulary and oral language skills can serve as a predictor of jail for at-risk boys and girls, which, again, this is really alarming and serious, and it's a big problem for us to tackle. Now let's take a look at this graph. As you can see, when we're looking at how poverty can affect the brain, there's a lot at stake, but language, which we know is the bedrock of literacy, and memory are the two things that suffer the most. And all of this information really begs the question, is there a way out of this? Is there hope for our kids who are living in this situation? And of course, the answer is a resounding yes. At school with you, the awesome news for our boys and girls is that environment plays an enormous role in improvement, and a child's environment in more than 50% of their waking hours is with you in the classroom. So we know that what you do does matter. The environment that you create using best practices has so much power and influence. Now I'm going to share with you video clips that were randomly collected on the Detroit Riverwalk back in June of 2014. I want you to really listen to and watch the expressions of the two young people that you're going to see as they reflect on and share about what made them feel valuable as very young students. I want you to really take note of what DeMario and Kayla share and what made an impact on them as kindergarten and first grade students, and how what they really remember can inform us a bit as educators. So let's watch.
My name is DeMario Perkins. I went to Fairplain Elementary in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And one thing I remember was the gym class. We had the big parachutes, and you used to run around in circles and flip the bean bags in the air, and then whatever the color landed on, that was you to go run around and chase someone. And we always did that every Friday and had pizza and good times. And what I did like was our gym teacher. He was real. He let you express yourself through what you like to do. You got to pick your games, and certain days, certain kids had their choice to pick what they wanted to do. And that's something that I grew to let my little brothers and let them do what they want to do, express themselves through playing.
All right, so we know that DeMario is not a trained teacher, and he might not be using the same lingo or buzzwords that we use as educators, but what he did have to say was very poignant. He mentions methodologies like action activities and student choice and authentic interactions, really making an impact on him as a little boy and making an impact on his learning and his attitude towards school and interactions and influence that he even had on younger family members as he became a young adult. Now we're going to take a look at Kayla, and again, just be thinking about what she has to say and the impact that it made on her.
My name is Kayla Rodriguez. I'm 18. I went to River Oaks Elementary School, and my kindergarten year, I remember walking in, and the teacher had fresh Play-Doh that she had just made. It smelled really, really good. And then I started, and I had a new teacher, and her name was Miss Eli, and she was really nice. And every day we had a story hour, and there was a little section blocked off by like bookshelves, and we'd walk in, and there's a rug, and we'd sit on the colors, and she would read us books, and we'd read the books so much that we would memorize them. So every time she'd be like, "Oh, who wants to read this book?" and everybody would be like, "Oh, we want to read." So we were kind of the more advanced class of kindergartners, I guess, and like we'd sit in the chair like like one of the teachers, and we'd read the books, and we would actually try to read the words. We had a choir, like a little. We had a choir teacher, and she would like we'd have like chairs and stuff. We'd stand on the chairs and we'd sing to the class and stuff. Everything we learned.
Okay, so again, Kayla is not an educator, but what she does mention as she recalls her kindergarten and first grade experiences is so powerful, and it includes best practices that we want to have going in our classroom. Kayla noted feeling and smelling homemade Play-Doh, interacting with quality children's literature, and being made to feel like a reader and a leader. And it caught my attention that Kayla said, we must have been in advanced class. And it makes me wonder, were they advanced, or did the teacher make this group of children believe that they were advanced? So one thing that both teachers had in common, even though these were two different children that were interviewed, or two different young people that were interviewed from two different schools, two different districts, the teachers had something in common. They both did something really special, and what they did was provide hope. Eric Jensen tells us in no uncertain terms, if you do nothing else as a teacher, provide hope. For many people living in poverty, hope and faith for tomorrow are the only things that keep them going each day. You must buy into this fact. If brains can change for the worse because of hopelessness, they can change for the better because of hope. For students living in poverty, hope is not a frivolous luxury, but an absolute necessity. And so, as we just heard in his research, Eric Jensen tells us you must buy into this fact. If brains can change for the worse because of hopelessness, they can change for the better because of hope. I want you to pay special attention to the chart here. On the left, we see a list of factors that are called brain reducers. Those brain reducers are associated with living in poverty, and they include things like distress that we talked about, inactivity that can lead to depression, even poor nutrition, and in some cases, isolation. And on the right, we see a list of brain enhancers. And those are purposeful environmental factors that we as teachers must incorporate into our day. Those include things like the creation of a pleasant, low-stress environment, movement, pro-social interaction and relationships, and new learning that builds new schema for boys and girls. So how do we purposefully build this into our already jam-packed days is the next question. I know how busy that we all are. And so I'm going to share a few video clip examples from real early elementary classrooms where teachers are intentionally building things in because as I mentioned earlier, one thing that is affected most by poverty is language development. So you're going to see these teachers intentionally building in language. We'll see these boys and girls engaged in lessons that meet them where they are academically, where they're able to take some risks, engage and play with music, and practice positive interaction. So I want you to take a look. We're going to start with this clip of boys and girls who are just being saturated in some of those important brain enhancers that we just talked about. So low stress, movement and action, pro-social contact, and music. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the science behind the benefits of music and tune in a bit. But let's watch.
And shake it all around. Move your body in, move your body out. Move your body in, and shake it all around. Yeah. Now spin around, around and around. Touch the ground, touch the ground. Let's move around and around, and shine.
All right? I love seeing those little ones engaged in moving their bodies and all of that language, all of those high-frequency words that we heard and language expressions, and they're having fun, too, while they're learning, including all of those brain enhancers. All right, now in a different classroom, we're going to see students involved again in an action activity, and this time we're going to be watching for the practice and mastery of things like key spatial relationships, conceptualizing, and physically following a series of verbal directions. So, again, let's watch.
Friend, put it on your foot. Put it under your foot. Pick it up with your right hand and give it to a friend. Put it on your shoulder. Hold it over your head. Move it fast around your head and give it to a friend. Hold it behind your back. Hold it under your knees. Turn it.
All right, and now in this next clip, in this kindergarten classroom, we're going to see the children being given a structured platform to practice some pro-social behaviors, interactions, and even that reciprocal conversation with each other and with their teacher. And you'll see them interacting and using manners and being kind and friendly and more. So let's watch.
Thank you, you're welcome, I'm sorry, it's okay, how do you feel? I'm fine, thank you, these are some very nice things to say.
I just love that. And now, up until this point, we've talked a little bit about the idea of tunes and music and the imperative role that they play in creating a stress-free environment in our classrooms. And according to Jeffrey Miller from the University College of London, our brains are constantly trying to make order out of disorder. And music is an amazing pattern game for our higher cognitive centers. From our culture, we learn, even if unconsciously, about musical structures and tones. Ways of understanding music unfolds over time, and our brains are exercised by extracting different patterns and groupings. It's this very kind of pattern recognition that's very important for us to make sense of the world around us. And again, that's from Jeffrey Miller. So in this next clip that we're going to watch, we're going to see how this little guy connects music and tunes to literacy and to early reading behaviors.
You're ready? Get your finger ready. Look down. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, Z. Now we know our ABCs. Can we sing them once more, please?
Okay, I just love those concepts about print and action, the way he was tracking and doing the return sweep and one-to-one correspondence, all with the music going in the background. So really, those brain enhancers were really at play. Now, in this last clip, we're going to view, notice the brain enhancer of new learning. That is one of the things that we talked about, building new schema. So not only are the children using puppets to tell a familiar story called The Farmer and the Carrot, but they're also adding to their prior knowledge. They're adding prior knowledge about things like farm animals and planting seeds and gardening. So this strategy of building background by engaging children in stories with settings that might not be part of their day-to-day life is really important for boys and girls.
Please help me pull up my carrot. For the farmer and the horse and the cow and pulled, but the carrot did not come up.
All right. So what does all of this mean for our students ultimately? We know that in this poverty scenario, we start with communities and families in need, which of course means that children from these families are coming into our classrooms. And after you intervene with powerful best practices and create those brain-enhancing classroom environments that we talked a little bit about today, student achievement is going to go up, communities are potentially going to be changed, and that's going to break that cycle for some of our boys and girls. With each of these purposeful methodologies, in addition to that cognition growing and that language growing, relationships are built and nurtured too. So now it's time for you to act. And we know that today we've just skimmed the surface. This is a huge issue in our country, but I hope that you've gotten some great ideas and some great strategies for how you can start to work together with your colleagues to determine how you'll incorporate some of these brain enhancers into your classroom environment that will ultimately break that cycle and empower your students despite the odds. And we really hope that you take this information and these strategies to make the world a better place, one hopeful, joyful, confident little child at a time. And again, if you're interested in more titles or ideas for your own reading or for staff book clubs and so forth, here are more great titles in addition to the Eric Jensen book that I mentioned at the beginning. I would be happy to send those titles to you in an email, so feel free to contact me. My email is right there at any time. And so now I'm going to send it back to Jennifer, and she'll let me know if there were any questions during our session today. Just thank you, everyone, so much. Jen?
Thanks, Jody. We did have a couple questions come in. One was, you talked about elementary kids, but how does this fit for older kids?
Oh, that I think is a really good question. And you know, those brain reducers and brain enhancers aren't just specifically for early childhood or early elementary kids. Even our older elementary kids, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, middle school, high school, even adults can benefit from some of those brain enhancers. So even for those older students, the idea of creating a classroom, or at least moments in your classroom where there's a stress-free environment, where everyone feels confident, where you can incorporate things like maybe setting up a situation where children will have to interact with one another socially, or do something fun with music. All of those things are brain enhancers, just no matter the age of the student. So that's a great question, and I hope that was helpful.
And then the last question, Jody, I'm going to put you on the spot to make you think a little bit.
All right.
Do you go back to the video that the teacher was reading the prepositional phrases in?
Sure. Let's see if I can make sure I do it the right way. I'm glad somebody picked up on that. Let's see.
And she'd like to know what the name of the book was.
Okay. Tell me if the image that you see on the screen is the right image. Is that the right image? I think, yes. When they're saying put it on your arm, put it on your shoulder, that is an action activity actually from one of our GrapeSEED materials, and the activity is called Give It to a Friend.
Perfect. Thanks, Jody. I told her I had to wait
Sure.
to the end because I wasn't sure which one that was.
Yeah,
video
yeah,
it was.
that is called,
so.
Yep, that's called Give It to a Friend. And there are lots of action activities that have, and stories that have those prepositional words and prepositional phrases embedded in. So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Jody, for sharing all of that information about how every one of us can easily work with these children and give them so many more opportunities. So we hope everyone enjoyed learning about how poverty affects all of our students. To conclude the webinar, there will be a quick survey to gather your feedback and to get ideas for future webinars. We would really appreciate you taking just a couple minutes to answer the questions and let us know how we can help you in the future. So thanks again for joining us, and we hope everyone has a great night.